Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about the HOA that put up signs on my land. I nearly drove the pickup into the ditch when I spotted the bright orange plywood triangles staked along the front fence line. 6 of them, evenly spaced like some garish picket parade, each yelling in 2-inch block letters, "For sale by HOA, call now." Beneath the heading was a number I didn't recognize, and, in smaller print, a smug promise of attractive terms for qualified buyers. In 42 years of living on my family's old cedar-sided farmhouse, I had never once entertained the idea of selling, yet overnight somebody had apparently decided to peddle my land like discount fireworks. The early morning fog hadn't even burned off the hayfield, but I felt heat rising up my neck the second I read those words. This wasn't a prank sign taped to a lamppost. It was a coordinated declaration posted on property that had been in my bloodline since Theodore Roosevelt was president. Most disturbing of all, the signs claimed to speak on behalf of an HOA, a homeowners association I had never joined, voted on, or frankly, even respected. In that moment, I realized my quiet life at the edge of town had just collided headfirst with suburban entitlement. Let me sketch the setting so you understand what kind of powder keg I was standing on. My 10-acre parcel sits at the end of a county road that used to be gravel, but was paved 5 years back when a developer carved 200 cookie-cutter houses out of the soybean farm across the creek. They called the subdivision Willow Knoll Estates, but locals joke that the only willow in sight is the one sketched on the billboard at the entrance. Willow Knoll came with an aggressive HOA that patrolled paint colors and grass heights, as though Shangri-La depended on uniform mailboxes. Because my land was adjacent, our driveways practically touched, and the new residents treated my battered red barn like a permanent eyesore, ruining their brochure fantasy. Still, for the most part, they were courteous, if slightly snooty neighbors. I sold them sweet corn in the summer. They waved from SUV windows and everyone left well enough alone. That détente lasted exactly until last Thursday, when someone high on their own self-importance decided my deed didn't matter anymore. I parked, yanked the first sign out of the ground, and stomped over to the nearest. Thick carpenter staples held corrugated plastic to 2x2 stakes, as professional as any realtor's installation. Each placard listed a square footage that matched my full acreage and an asking price at least 30 grand below the going rate, almost like they were rushing a clearance sale. The nerve it took to advertise a discount on property they didn't own struck me like a slap. On the back of every board, in tiny type, sat a warning: tampering with this notice constitutes trespass and vandalism under HOA Rule 14. I laughed out loud. Rule 14 might scare someone who'd signed their bylaws, but I answered to state statutes and county ordinances, not a club charter dreamed up over sparkling water and cheese cubes. Still, I knew better than to rip down evidence before documenting it, so I snapped photos from every angle, making sure the creek, barn, and my mailbox were in frame to prove location. Then I dialed my friend Elijah, a deputy in the sheriff's office. "Put the coffee on, Eli," I growled. "Got a trespass case brewing." While waiting for Eli to roll out, I marched across the property line to Willow Knoll's stone gateway, where a glossy directory board listed the HOA's emergency contact. A name I recognized popped up: Association President Dorian. Dorian, no last name ever offered, was the sort of silver-templed striver who introduced himself with a firm handshake and a resume. At last year's block potluck, he bragged about having streamlined 3 separate associations in 2 states, as though lording over mulch depth were a national calling. I punched the number. He picked up on the second ring, voice smooth like he practiced it in front of a mirror. "This is Dorian, Association President. How may I assist you?" "You can start by explaining why your signs are jabbed into my pasture," I said, ice clinking in each word. A pause, then, "I'm sorry, who's speaking?" "The legal owner of those 10 acres you're illegally marketing." He cleared his throat. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Our records indicate that parcel was offered to the subdivision as green space in the developer's original master plan. It defaults to association management." I laughed again, a short bark this time. "Check the county clerk website, champ. Deeds in my name, filed 1983, renewed 2017. Unless you're about to accuse the registrar of a clerical coup, you are trespassing." He tried a softer tactic. "Let's discuss calmly," but I ended the call the moment red and blue lights turned onto the gravel. Deputy Elijah swung out of his cruiser, boots crunching frost, and surveyed the gaudy stakes with a low whistle. "Looks like someone confused courage with paperwork." he muttered. I filled him in, handed over photo evidence, and pointed to tire tracks that curved from the subdivision entrance straight onto my verge. He radioed dispatch to tag the scene, then asked if I'd consent to a walkthrough of the adjoining subdivision for further documentation. Together, we traced the ruts past the koi pond fountain and over to Dorian's stucco palace at the cul-de-sac's crown. Rhythmic pops of a nail gun echoed from his driveway, where workers installed new shutters, expensive composite ones that never need repainting. Eli rolled his eyes. Funny how folks spending that kind of cash get stingy about property lines. We knocked. Dorian answered, wearing a powder blue polo with the association logo stitched where a corporate chest badge might go. His smile died when he saw the uniform. Eli explained we were opening an investigation into criminal trespass, potential fraud, and false advertising. Dorian's jaw muscles fluttered, but he invited us inside anyway, motioning toward a tidy home office bursting with binders labeled bylaws, covenants, and, ominously, annexations. Eli and I weren't lawyers, but we could spot an absence of official stamps a mile away. Inside the annexation binder were crisp color maps showing Willow Knoll's manicured streets wrapped around a shaded green polygon labeled Future Parkland. That polygon was my farm, but nowhere did we see the county seal, planning commission approval, or even the developer's signature. What we did find was a letter on imitation letterhead purporting to be from the county assessor dated 6 weeks prior, confirming the transfer of ownership for tax purposes. I had paid my November property tax myself with a cashier's check. Eli verified the receipt in the county database right there on his tablet. The assessor's office had never issued such a letter. "This is forged, Dorian," Eli said, tapping the page. Dorian inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. "We believed the developer had released the parcel. Perhaps they filed incorrectly." I shot him a look. "You went to law school, remember? You told everyone at the potluck twice. You couldn't spot a missing notarization?" He stammered that volunteer boards rely on good faith representations. Eli asked him to remain available for further questioning and advised that removal or alteration of documents could trigger an obstruction charge. We left him pale as drywall primer. By noon, I was sitting in the county appraiser's cubicle, laptop open, 2 clerks leaning over my shoulder as we zoomed into digital plats. They confirmed nothing had changed hands. The clerk manager, a no-nonsense woman named Francine, scribbled a memo stating the county recognized me as sole owner and had never approved any HOA management of the land. She printed 3 certified copies and embossed each with a metallic seal, the kind that feels like armor when you hold it. Next stop was the registrar's office, where a similarly appalled records chief stamped affidavits to the same effect. Armed with these, I posted a notice at the entrance of Willow Knoll. Legal declaration: the farm at lot 301 remains private property. Any interference will be prosecuted under Florida statute. Go ahead and fill the blank with your state. Point is, I quoted chapter and verse. Residents slowed their golf carts to read while I hammered the sheet inside a plastic sleeve. I wasn't looking for confrontation with my neighbors, but they needed to know who was steering their ship toward the rocks. Sure enough, that evening my phone blew up with local numbers. The first call came from a young couple, Maddie and Trent, who'd bought a starter home on Willow Lane. They apologized profusely, said they had no clue their fees were being used to strong-arm me, and offered to attend any hearing as witnesses. The second caller was less pleasant, a realtor who said several buyers had already toured my lot online and expected open house access. I told her she'd been duped and recommended she contact her errors and omissions insurer before someone sued her into oblivion. By the 5th call, word had traveled. The association's claim to my property was bunk. But one rumor sprouted that I planned to sell anyway and erect a scrap metal recycling yard out of spite. I can't say I discouraged that rumor. In fact, I leaned in, texting a few acquaintances that I was considering a business permit for a hog rendering plant. Pure satire, but it sent panic rippling through the subdivision newsletter. 2 days later, the investigation took a darker turn. Eli called to say the sheriff's office had received complaints from 3 separate Willow Knoll families who claimed they'd paid special assessments, marketed as green space acquisition fees. The money, nearly $75 grand total, had been deposited into an account controlled solely by Dorian and the association treasurer, a mild retiree named Coraline, who apparently signed checks without reading the memo lines. That assessment was never disclosed in annual budgets mailed to residents. It was collected through optional contributions that looked official enough to fool newcomers. In other words, Dorian wasn't just messing with my deed, he was running a slush fund. The sheriff's office subpoenaed bank statements. The district attorney's office signaled interest. When a DA gets involved, the stakes leap from neighborly spat to felony theater. I couldn't pretend glee, but I also couldn't deny a certain satisfaction blooming in my chest. Sometimes karma drives a patrol car. While the legal gears ground forward, I indulged in a bit of harmless, malicious compliance. The HOA covenants, which of course didn't apply to me, forbade non-decorative fencing over 4 feet tall, so I erected a rustic split-rail barrier exactly 4 feet high along our shared boundary. On my side, I stacked hay bales and parked a vintage manure spreader I'd picked up at auction years ago. I draped a banner over it, "Future Manure Demonstration Area. Kindly mind the splash zone." Every detail was USDA averse but perfectly lawful on agricultural land. A drone belonging to some hobbyist neighbor buzzed overhead taking footage. I tipped my straw hat and waved. You could almost hear digital property values dropping. Within hours, Willow Knoll's group chat, "I had a mole," fizzed with demands to negotiate with the farmer before he ruined their resale prospects. I set my phone face down and kept tacking up more colorful banners. Purebred piglet pageant next Saturday, cowbell symphony rehearsal, you name it. The next real plot movement came at the emergency HOA meeting the following Tuesday night. Dorian tried to bar me from entering the community clubhouse until Eli, wearing plain clothes but flashing his badge at the door, reminded him the building was rented via county permit and thus open to the public. I sat in the back row beside Francine, the county clerk, who had decided to observe for educational purposes. The room smelled of tension and potluck meatballs. Dorian launched into a PowerPoint about protecting neighborhood aesthetics and leveraging underutilized parcels. When he clicked to the slide mapping my farm as Phase 2 civic expansion, murmurs turned into outright heckling. A homeowner named Kevin stood up and asked whether the board possessed a recorded deed transferring title. When Dorian hemmed, Kevin produced photocopies of Francine's memo confirming my ownership. Pandemonium ensued, people shouting refund demands, older residents fanning themselves with meeting agendas. Coraline, the treasurer, burst into tears and confessed Dorian had told her the money would be reimbursed by grant funds that never materialized. She begged forgiveness and offered to resign on the spot. At that point, Eli stepped forward to announce that law enforcement would be serving a warrant for financial records within the hour. Dorian tried to flee the clubhouse before the warrant arrived, but he made the strategic error of running toward the parking lot where 2 patrol units already idled. The deputies cuffed him politely, read his rights, and placed him in the back seat. Neighbors stood jaw-dropped. One guy actually filmed vertical video but missed half because his hand was shaking. The charge sheet would later list fraud, forgery, criminal trespass, and misappropriation of funds exceeding $50,000, each a separate felony. As the cruiser pulled away, Francine leaned over and whispered, "That's one way to streamline an association." Someone cracked a nervous laugh, and then the meeting disbanded faster than a fire drill. I lingered, signing 6 witness statements and photocopying every page for my lawyer, a bulldog named Geneva who loves nothing more than converting indignity into punitive damages. In the days following the arrest, the mood around Willow Knoll shifted from antagonistic to almost neighborly. Folks stopped by with casseroles, half apology and half bribe, so I wouldn't proceed with the hog rendering plant. I assured them no livestock symphony was actually coming, though I did accept a rhubarb pie or 2. Coraline, now ex-treasurer, personally dug up every for sale sign under my supervision and repainted the disturbed soil to match. The County Board of Commissioners issued a public statement affirming that agricultural parcels could not be annexed by homeowner organizations without explicit notarized consent from the owner and approval at multiple public hearings. Talk radio hosts loved that soundbite for a whole week. I received a letter from the State Attorney General praising my vigilant defense of property rights and enclosing a pamphlet about the Sunshine Law, which frankly I already knew better than my own birthday. Still, it felt nice to have the wind at my back. Geneva drafted the civil complaint like a novelist writes a thriller, meticulous, suspenseful, and merciless in its crescendo. We sued Dorian personally, the HOA as an entity, and the busted development company that had apparently encouraged him. The claims included slander of title, tortious interference, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of state deceptive trade statutes. Residents feared we intended to bankrupt their budget, but Geneva structured it so the insurer would shoulder defense costs and any payout. The individual plaintiffs, me and a class of homeowners duped by the green space fee, benefited, while innocent neighbors weren't left destitute. A settlement conference 6 months later produced a tidy result. I received a lump sum payment equal to the inflated difference in my property value plus punitive damages, and the HOA bylaws were rewritten under court supervision. Dorian, now sporting an orange jumpsuit, signed the settlement from county jail after pleading no contest to reduced counts. He'd serve 18 months followed by probation, during which he was barred from holding any fiduciary role. Coraline got diversion and mandatory accounting courses. She baked me another pie by way of thanks. With the settlement funds, I went on a bit of an improvement spree, but one calculated to soothe rather than inflame. I repainted the barn its traditional red, replaced rotting clapboards, and installed a small farm stand at the driveway offering fresh eggs, honey, and produce to anyone, Willow Knoll residents included, on a pay-what-you-can honor system. The stand became a minor sensation. Kids pedaled over on bikes to grab cucumbers and drop quarters into a tin. Every Saturday, Trent helped me set up folding tables for a mini-market where neighboring artisans sold bread or candles. It wasn't a formal farmer's market, too small, but it was community, the kind that doesn't need dues or bylaws. I also donated $5,000 to the county 4-H chapter under the association's name, something the new board chair appreciated as a goodwill gesture. Funny how transparency and a little sweet corn can patch up fences better than any committee ever could. Yet one thread still dangled: the developer. They had quietly filed Chapter 11 when housing interest rates spiked, but their remaining officers possessed emails proving they knew Dorian's annexation scheme lacked legal basis. The bankruptcy trustee invited creditors to submit claims. Geneva and I entered the fray armed with correspondence and deposition transcripts. Ultimately, we secured a modest recovery that covered my legal fees and funded scholarship grants for local trade school students. Better yet, the trustee forwarded our evidence to the State Construction Licensing Board, which suspended the developer's privilege to build new subdivisions. That ripple effect meant the next rural community down the highway wouldn't face the same arrogant blueprint of covenants and contempt. In a sense, the farm fought back not just for itself, but for everyone tired of being steamrolled by faux authority. People ask whether the ordeal soured me on neighbors or strengthened my faith in the system. The honest answer is both, depending on the hour you catch me. I learned that well-dressed cul-de-sac bullies can weaponize paperwork, but I also learned you can marshal the same bureaucracy right back at them, if you're stubborn enough to read every footnote. I learned that county clerks wield more quiet power than most senators. And I learned never to ignore the first sign, literally, that someone's erasing your name from your own land. My granddad used to say, "Land's not just dirt, it's the story of who stood on it before you." I intend for my chapter to read, "He stood and he didn't budge." Last weekend, I hosted a harvest bonfire. Rusty steel drums burned cedar scraps, kids roasted marshmallows, and the moon laid silver ribbons across the creek. Francine sang Old Bluegrass. Eli kept the peace with a mug of cider, and even Coraline showed up, cheeks pink, brandishing a lemon meringue masterpiece. Someone asked if I'd ever think of selling the farm now that its value had appreciated. I pointed at the horizon where fireflies blinked over the hay and said, "Not while I'm breathing." They laughed, but I wasn't joking. In that glow, I felt the weight of deed pages, court orders, and notarized seals melt into something simpler: custodianship. The land isn't merchandise, it's a living chapter of community. And as long as I'm its caretaker, no sign, no matter how bright the paint, will ever say otherwise. I couldn't help thinking about the last time someone tried to encroach on our fields. My father once told me a story, half in jest, about how my great-granddad fenced off the property with barbed wire overnight when a railroad survey crew claimed eminent domain without proper filings. He sat on the porch with a shotgun across his knees, rocking slow and steady until county agents produced legitimate papers. They never did. The rail line shifted east and our orchard survived World War II to feed half the county during rationing. Dad used to keep the twisted wire stapled to a board above the mantel as a reminder that ink is cheap but land is priceless. Those tales once felt like sepia-toned folklore, heroic but distant, the kind of yarns old-timers swap at diners when the coffee's gone cold. Yet here I was, living a remix of the same saga, only the trespassers wore golf polos instead of rail hats, and their weapon was fine print instead of steel. Times change, but hubris apparently has no expiration date, and vigilance still matters even when the battlefield is a conference room rather than a cornfield. My suspicion that the battle wasn't over yet proved right the following week, when I discovered fresh tire tracks gouging the muddy lane behind the barn. At first, I assumed a delivery truck had turned around, but then I spotted a stack of lumber dumped beside the north fence, treated boards, posts, bags of concrete mix, enough to build a sizable structure. Taped to one bag was a folded blueprint dated the previous day, detailing a community tool shed roughly where my blueberry bushes grew. The page carried the HOA letterhead and, in the corner, Dorian's scribbled signature. Apparently, he'd scheduled construction before the arrest, and someone either hadn't gotten the memo or decided to push ahead regardless. I called Eli. We walked the site together, photographing every footprint and marking prints with flags. The deputy sent a patrol cruiser to canvass the neighborhood. Within hours, a contractor wearing a reflective vest strolled down my drive asking where I wanted the shed assembled. When confronted, he produced a cashier's check for half the work, funds that traced back to the same HOA account. The contractor became an unwitting witness, swearing he'd been told the property was HOA-controlled parkland. This little fiasco added an extra count of attempted grand theft to Dorian's charge list. The saga inevitably attracted local media. A scrappy evening news channel dispatched a reporter, Gina, whose eyes lit up at the phrase HOA fraud. She interviewed me under the big pecan tree out front. Camera zoomed in on the now-removed signposts stacked like defeated spears. Gina later cornered Willow Knoll residents, some furious, some embarrassed, piecing together a segment that aired during Sweeps Week under the headline, "Subdivision Scandal, Farmer Fights Back." The clip featured Eli quoting statutes, Francine flashing county seals like gold medallions, and, in a delicious twist, doorbell cam footage of Dorian being led away in handcuffs. The package ended with B-roll of my Cowbell Symphony banner flapping in the breeze, lending the piece an almost comedic finish. Within 24 hours, the story went mildly viral online, attracting sympathy from folks nationwide who'd butted heads with petty neighborhood bureaucrats. I received handwritten letters, one from as far as Alaska, applauding the stand and offering legal research assistance. A retired judge mailed me a first-edition copy of the Homestead Act with a note. Sometimes the old laws are still the best armor. The support reminded me that while my address felt small, the principle stretched coast to coast and back again. Preliminary hearing day drew a crowd that clogged the courthouse metal detectors. I'd never seen so many pressed slacks and floral dresses in one place outside Easter Sunday. Dorian shuffled in, flanked by his attorney, wrists free for the day but eyes haunted. The prosecution outlined the forgery scheme, the fake letterhead, the sham green space assessments, and the attempted annexation. Dorian's lawyer tried to argue administrative oversight, but the judge wasn't buying it. When the county assessor took the stand and flatly stated the letter was an amateur fake printed on consumer-grade cardstock, you could feel the room tilt against the defense. Later, the contractor testified about the secret shed project, presenting the cashier's check as Exhibit G. At one point, Dorian buried his face in his palms while jurors watched with tight jaws. The hearing ended with the judge binding the case over for trial and revoking bail pending mental health evaluation, citing risk of continued fraudulent activity. Legal reporters scribbled frantic notes. I simply tucked my certified deed back into its manila envelope and went home to feed the chickens. Even as the legal circus rumbled on, day-to-day life demanded ordinary cooperation. Willow Knoll still bordered my fence, and kids still cut across my field on the way to school bus stops. I decided it was better to welcome them than police them, so I carved a mowed pathway, lined it with solar lights, and posted a sign, "Safe route, walk, don't litter." In return, a handful of parents volunteered during harvest, helping me pick tomatoes or prune apple limbs. We swapped farm stand credit for their labor. It became an unofficial work-share program. The former adversarial vibes faded into neighborly rapport, proving that grassroots goodwill can outvote any board agenda. That didn't stop me from attending every HOA meeting as a silent observer. The new president, a level-headed nurse named Marisol, revamped the budget to favor community events over enforcement fines. She even invited me to give a talk titled "Know Your Property Rights" during National Home Ownership Month. Talk about poetic justice. The man nearly ousted from his land, now educating his would-be ousters. I prepped for the seminar like a grad student cramming for finals. Geneva provided case citations, Francine lent visual aids, oversized reproductions of a warranty deed, a quitclaim deed, and a forged document so people could spot the differences. On event night, the clubhouse projector flickered while I walked 60 residents through basic land law, adverse possession myths, and the perils of ignoring county filings. I peppered the lecture with humor. "A seal embossed by your cousin's cricut doesn't make a document official," drew laughter and groans in equal measure. Marisol had stocked the refreshment table with lemonade and fresh-baked rolls from Coraline, who seemed determined to atone carb-wise for her bookkeeping sins. The quanda stretched past 9 o'clock. One gentleman admitted he'd never actually read his own mortgage packet. Another asked how to verify that a lien release was properly recorded. I realized many folks, even the well-intentioned, coast through life trusting complicated systems they barely understand. Yet ignorance doesn't shield you, as Dorian's neighbors learned the hard way. Preparing for that talk forced me to examine why HOAs wield such influence in the first place. Their power thrives on apathy. Busy professionals sign covenants they never read, relying on elected volunteers who in turn lean on arcane rules drafted by developers seeking uniformity for quick sales. Uniformity begets control. Control attracts people like Dorian who crave authority within arm's reach of their own front porch. Strip away glossy brochures and you're staring at a miniature government, one without the checks and balances we demand of bigger institutions. Don't misunderstand. Not every association is a villain, but any system can go feral if left unmonitored, and mine had sprouted a wolf in khakis. Realizing that sparked a notion. Maybe I could push for statutory reform requiring periodic third-party audits for HOAs above a certain budget threshold. I floated the idea to Gina, the reporter, who promised to chase the angle for a follow-up series. Sometimes narrative momentum is your best lobbyist. One rainy afternoon, Geneva and I drove to the county detention center to depose Dorian for the civil case. He emerged in a beige jumpsuit, shackled at the ankles, looking smaller than I remembered, as though arrogance used to inflate his frame and the needle had now popped. Under oath, he admitted forging the assessor's letter, claiming he'd found a template online and printed it during a bout of extreme stress about property values. He maintained the Green Space Fund was meant to benefit everyone and insisted he intended to reimburse donations after annexation succeeded. Geneva asked bluntly, "Were you aware annexation could not succeed without the owner's consent?" Dorian hesitated, then nodded. There it was, intent. He tried to pivot, accusing the developer of pressuring him, but the record already showed his solo signatures on every fraudulent check. The deposition finished, and as guards led him away, he looked at me and whispered, "You could have just sold." I replied, "You could have just asked." A month after the deposition, the local state senator caught wind of Gina's investigative series and invited a small delegation, including me, Marisol, and Francine, to a roundtable on HOA transparency. The meeting took place in a handsome committee room painted institutional beige, where the thermostat fought summer humidity and the smell of stale coffee hung in the air. We sat under humming fluorescent lights while a stenographer poised her fingers above an antiquated stenotype machine. I outlined how a single forged letter nearly cost me generational land, and how residents paid bogus fees because no statute required audited disclosures. Francine explained the administrative burden counties face when correcting privately manufactured chaos. Marisol, representing homeowners, testified that most residents join HOAs for pool keys and end up tangled in bylaws thicker than tax codes. We pitched solutions: mandatory annual financial statements filed with the Secretary of State, standardized training for board officers, whistleblower hotlines, and clear criminal penalties for any unauthorized land action. Staffers scribbled notes, eyes wide whenever Geneva recited precedent for punitive damages. The senator concluded by promising to submit a draft bill before the next session and asked if we'd testify again. On the Capitol steps afterward, Marisol nudged me. "You realize your farm might rewrite state statute?" I adjusted my hat, grinned, and said, "Wouldn't be the strangest crop I've grown." As autumn rolled in, scarlet dogwood leaves painting the drainage ditch, the farm stand evolved into far more than a produce shelf. We tacked up a chalkboard schedule of weekend workshops: beekeeping, jam-making, composting, carpentry using reclaimed pallets, open to anyone with curiosity and $10 for supplies, or a willingness to barter labor. Attendance skyrocketed. I discovered suburban professionals long to escape spreadsheets and touch soil. A cardiologist learned to prune peach trees with handsaw finesse. marveling at the meditative silence compared to his operating room. An IT consultant brewed cider in my kettle barn and later rigged a temperature sensor that texted him when fermentation spiked, all while humming bluegrass tunes downloaded that morning. Older retirees taught younger families how to knead bread, while toddlers toddled between pumpkin mounds. The laughter echoing off weathered boards replaced the earlier bitterness so thoroughly that one evening, standing beside a fire barrel and watching a circle of kids chase my crested chickens across the yard, I almost forgot the lurid for sale signs had ever existed. Maybe the moral is this: when authority fails, neighbors can still triumph, provided someone holds open the gate and maybe offers a slice of warm apple pie. In late November, with frost silvering the grass before dawn and breath rising like steam from the horse's nostrils, the county clerk's office broadcast an email blast. The development company's last remaining executive had struck a plea deal. He stood before Judge Alvarez that morning and pled guilty to negligent supervision and failure to maintain escrow integrity. The courtroom gallery contained several Willow Knoll residents clutching refund checks as exhibits of harm. The plea required a $1.2 million restitution fund earmarked for homeowners, county infrastructure, and an educational grant to promote ethical real estate management. Judge Alvarez, a stern woman whose demeanor could chill August heat, scolded the executive, "When you nurture greed, you harvest distrust." She ordered community service hours spent lecturing at Realtor continuing education seminars about what happens when covenants turn con. It felt like the final puzzle piece clicking into place. Within weeks, sidewalks were repoured, potholes filled, the county library's Wi-Fi upgraded, and our 4-H scholarship program funded for 5 additional years. Watching corporate misbehavior convert into public good tasted sweeter than the honey drawn from my autumn hives. Friends, thank you. See you soon.